I heard the number before I understood what it meant. $2.5 million. I was standing in the hallway outside my own kitchen, holding a laundry basket, and the security app was open on my phone because the porch camera had been glitching all week. I wasn't spying. I want to be clear about that, because later people would ask me if I'd planned it, if I'd suspected him for months and finally caught him. I hadn't. I was checking a camera angle. And instead, I found a recording from 2 nights earlier, my husband's voice, low and businesslike, talking to a man I'd only met 3 or 4 times. "She doesn't know anything," Daniel said. "And she's not going to know anything." The other man, Richard, his name was Richard, a friend from some conference, a man with a boat and 3 ex-wives and a laugh that filled a room, asked him something I had to rewind twice to catch clearly. "And you're sure about this?" 2.5, final number, no complications. "No complications," Daniel said. "She trusts me completely." I stood there in the hallway with a basket of his shirts against my hip, and I felt the floor tilt. I didn't confront him that night. I want you to understand why, because it matters for everything that comes after. I closed the app. I folded his shirts. I put them in his drawer, the 3rd one down, the way I'd done for 9 years. And I went to bed next to a man who had, 2 nights earlier, quietly discussed selling me for $2.5 million, and I said nothing, because I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I let him know that I knew. But to understand how a woman ends up folding laundry for a man who's selling her, you have to go back. Not far. Just far enough. Daniel and I met in college, in a lecture hall in Ohio. Both of us broke and ambitious and certain we were going to be the exception, the couple that made it, the couple that didn't turn into their parents. He was funny in a way that snuck up on you. Quiet, then suddenly the funniest person in the room. I fell for him slowly and then all at once, the way you're supposed to. We got married 5 years after graduation, in a backyard, 40 guests, a cake his aunt made that leaned slightly to the left the whole reception. I didn't just love him. I want to say that plainly, because it's the thing that makes what happened later feel less like a plot twist and more like a wound. I trusted him with everything. My money, my family, the parts of myself I didn't show anyone else. When my mother got sick the year after our wedding, Daniel was the one who sat with me in waiting rooms. When his business failed the first time, I was the one who took a second job so we could keep the apartment. That's what a marriage is supposed to look like. 2 people taking turns carrying the weight. 5 years in, it was his turn to need carrying, and I didn't hesitate. It started with him being tired all the time. Then swelling in his ankles that wouldn't go down. Then a doctor's appointment that turned into a referral, which turned into a diagnosis neither of us had ever heard pronounced out loud before it became the center of our entire lives: kidney failure, advanced. The kind that doesn't wait politely for you to get your affairs in order. "How long?" Daniel asked the nephrologist, and I remember his hand finding mine on the exam table, cold and shaking. "Without a transplant, we're talking months, not years," the doctor said. "With one, you could live a completely normal life." Dialysis bought us time. 3 days a week, for hours a session, Daniel coming home gray and hollowed out, sleeping through dinner, apologizing for sleeping through dinner. He lost weight he didn't have to lose. He stopped talking about the future in anything but fragments. "If I'm still around for that," he'd say, and I'd tell him to stop, and he'd apologize again. We got on the transplant list. The wait time for a deceased donor kidney in our region was 4 to 6 years. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. Daniel might not have 4 to 6 years. "What about a living donor?" I asked. In one of those sterile little consultation rooms with the box of tissues nobody ever needed until suddenly everybody did. That's when they tested me. I want to tell you I didn't think twice, and mostly that's true. There was one moment, in the parking garage after the compatibility results came back, when the coordinator said the words, "excellent match," and I sat in my car and cried for reasons I couldn't fully name. Relief, yes, but also something quieter and more frightening underneath the relief. A kind of vertigo, like standing at the edge of a decision you can't take back. My sister didn't hide her feelings about it. "You don't have to do this," she said, over coffee, her voice tight. "There are other options. You could wait for a match through the list. He doesn't have 4 years, Renee. You have exactly one body. One. What happens if something goes wrong on the table? What happens if you need that kidney yourself someday?" I remember looking at her and saying something I still believe, even now, even after everything. If I can save his life, how could I say no? She didn't have an answer for that. Nobody really does, when you frame it that way. It's the kind of sentence that sounds unshakable right up until it isn't. The surgery happened on a Tuesday in March. I remember the fluorescent lights of the pre-op room, the nurse drawing a marker line on my side, Daniel crying, actually crying, not performing it, as they wheeled me back. "I don't deserve you," he said, and I laughed and told him not to be dramatic, and those were the last words I said to him before they put me under. I woke up missing something I would spend the rest of my life without. He woke up 6 hours later in a different room, with a piece of me inside him, keeping him alive. For a while, it was beautiful in the way that only surviving something together can be beautiful. We healed side by side, comparing scars, laughing about matching souvenirs. His color came back. His energy came back. The version of Daniel from before the diagnosis came back too. Or so I thought, the funny one, the one who filled a room. I remember thinking, this is what it was all for. This is the return on every hard year. That lasted maybe 4 months. Then the calls started. Late at night, Daniel stepping out onto the balcony to take them, his voice dropping the second the door slid shut. "Business," he said when I asked. New opportunities, now that he had his health and his energy back. He started dressing differently, better fabrics, a watch I didn't recognize, cologne that wasn't the one I'd bought him for Christmas. He started disappearing for meetings that ran long and left no trace in any calendar I could see. I told myself it was stress. Recovery, gratitude, the strange psychological weight of having survived something. People process that in different ways, don't they? I read an article once about transplant guilt, the recipient sometimes struggling under the debt of what they'd been given. I thought maybe that's what this was. Maybe he didn't know how to be close to me anymore because he owed me something no one can really repay. I had no idea how right I was about the debt and how wrong I was about everything else. Richard entered the picture around then, though I didn't clock him as significant at first. Just one of Daniel's friends from some industry event, a man who'd made his money in something vague, logistics or shipping or investments, depending on which version of the story Daniel told that week. Richard had a way of looking at a room like he already owned everything worth owning in it. He was charming in the specific way that wealthy men are charming when they've never once had to consider the word no. He started coming around more. Dinners that Daniel would arrange and then, at the last minute, ask me to keep it light, don't bring up anything personal. Their conversations would go quiet the second I walked into a room, not obviously, nothing dramatic, just a beat of silence and a subject change so smooth I second-guessed whether I'd imagined it. Then one night, Richard came to our house. Not for dinner. Late, after 10, let in through the side door like a delivery neither of us was supposed to notice. I was upstairs, half asleep, and I heard voices in the study below me, and I told myself it was nothing. It was not nothing. It was, in fact, the exact conversation that would end up on my porch camera 2 nights before I found it, the same conversation, or one very much like it. replayed and refined until the numbers were final and the arrangement was settled. $2.5 million. For me, I didn't understand the full shape of it that first night in the hallway with the laundry basket. All I had was a fragment. She doesn't know anything, and she's not going to know anything, and a dollar figure that made no sense attached to no context. I went back through the footage archive, hands shaking, and found an earlier clip the app had saved from the week before. Longer, clearer, the porch mic somehow catching more of the study window than it should have. That's where I heard the whole shape of it. Richard. Testing him. You're sure she won't cause problems? This isn't the kind of thing you walk back from. Daniel, cold in a way I had genuinely never heard from him in 9 years of marriage. She'll do whatever I tell her to do. She always has. And if she doesn't, she will. Trust me. I know exactly how to handle her. I sat on my bathroom floor at 1 a.m. with my husband asleep down the hall and played that sentence back 9 times. She'll do whatever I tell her to do. She always has. Here's the thing about hearing something like that. It doesn't just break the present moment. It reaches backward and breaks everything behind it too. Every memory I had of Daniel recalibrated itself in real time, like a photograph developing in reverse. The hospital, his hand on mine before they wheeled me into surgery, had that been love, or had that been a man calculating the value of what he was about to receive? The 4 good months after the transplant, when he seemed so grateful, so soft, so present, was that gratitude, or was that a man simply waiting for his new kidney to settle in before he went back to being whoever he actually was? I thought about the parking garage, the excellent match, the vertigo I'd felt and dismissed. I thought about my sister's voice, "You have exactly one body," and how she'd been asking the wrong question the whole time. The danger was never the surgery. The danger was who I was handing myself to afterward. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I made him coffee the way I always did, and I watched him drink it, and I thought I could ask him right now. I could put my phone on the table and press play and watch his face collapse. And some small, exhausted part of me wanted exactly that, wanted the immediate release of it, the scream, the plates thrown, the ugly cinematic confrontation. I didn't do that. I want to explain why, because I think it's the most important decision I made in this entire story. If I confronted him with nothing but a recording, he would have an explanation ready before I finished the sentence. He was good at that, always had been, some instinct for reframing that I'd mistaken for honesty for 9 years. He'd tell me it was a joke, a hypothetical, a business metaphor I'd misunderstood. He'd make me doubt what I'd heard with my own ears. And even if I didn't doubt it, even if I held firm, what would I actually have? One recording, no proof of intent to act, no paper trail, nothing that would survive a lawyer telling him to simply deny it. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I got quiet. Quieter than I'd ever been in my marriage. I started paying attention the way I imagine a detective does, or maybe the way a woman does when she finally understands that the man across the table from her is not who she thought he was. I backed up every clip from the security app to a private cloud account he didn't know existed. I started noticing which drawer he kept his second phone in. Yes, there was a second phone, hidden in a shaving kit he never used, because he'd stopped shaving with a razor 2 years ago and switched to an electric one. And some small deductive part of my brain filed that detail away without my even asking it to. I started documenting every late-night call. I noted the time. Every unexplained dinner with Richard. I saved the receipt from the joint card, cross-referenced against restaurants I quietly confirmed had no reservation under Daniel's actual business meetings. I found an email he'd forgotten to log out of a shared cloud drive we'd set up years ago for tax documents, and there, buried in a folder labeled Q3 Projects, was a draft agreement. Not fully executed. not signed, but a draft with language so clinical it made my skin crawl, terms describing an arrangement. A transfer of domestic and personal obligations, and, near the bottom, the figure I already knew by heart. I printed it. I photographed it on a device that wasn't connected to our home network. I started, very quietly, meeting with a lawyer, not the family lawyer Daniel and I had used for the house, but a woman 2 towns over I found through a friend of a friend, someone with no connection to Daniel's world at all. "He can't legally sell you," she told me, gently, the first time I laid it all out. "You understand that. Whatever this document is, it has no force. You're not property." "I know that," I said. "But I need him to think he got away with something long enough for me to have everything I need. And I need to understand what he's actually planning to do, because a man who talks about his wife like this doesn't stop at just talking." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she nodded, because she understood exactly what I meant. This wasn't only about humiliation or infidelity or money. There was a version of this where Daniel, once the money changed hands, needed me gone, not divorced, not messily separated, but simply gone, in whatever way was cleanest for a man who'd already proven he saw me as a transaction rather than a person. I didn't know how far he'd go. I only knew I couldn't afford to underestimate him. For 6 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was the wife who still made his coffee, still asked about his day, still slept beside him every night with a steadiness that must have looked, from the outside, exactly like nothing had changed. In the other, I was building a case, meeting the lawyer on my lunch breaks, quietly moving what I could of my own savings into an account he didn't have access to. Quietly telling my sister enough of the truth that she'd stand ready without asking too many questions I couldn't yet answer. The hardest part wasn't the deception. It was the moments that felt real anyway. One night, he fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, exhausted from whatever scheme he was mid-plotting, and for one disorienting second my body remembered 9 years of loving him, and I nearly woke him up and told him everything. Begged him to explain it away, begged for a version of the truth I could survive believing. I didn't. I sat very still until my arm went numb, and I let him sleep, and I thought about the scar on my side that I would carry for the rest of my life so that his body could keep functioning, and I let that thought steady me back into resolve. Richard, it turned out, was easier to read than Daniel. He liked being flattered. He liked being told he was clever. So when I happened to run into him at a charity dinner Daniel had dragged me to, I let him talk. Men like Richard cannot resist explaining themselves to a woman they've already decided doesn't matter. "Daniel's lucky to have a wife who doesn't ask too many questions," he said, 3 drinks in, testing the water. "I've learned it's better not to," I said, smiling in a way I'd practiced in the mirror. "Some things aren't really my business." He laughed at that, delighted, and over the next 20 minutes, buoyed by his own arrogance and my carefully performed indifference, Richard confirmed almost everything I already had on paper. The number. The timeline. He wanted the arrangement finalized within the month. And one detail that hadn't been in the draft document at all, one detail that told me exactly how little either of these men thought of me as a human being with a say in her own life. "Once it's done," Richard said, swirling his glass, "Daniel says you'll come around. Says you always do what's easiest for you in the end." I smiled and excused myself to the restroom, where I stood over the sink for a full minute, gripping the edge of it, before I went back out and finished my drink like a woman with absolutely nothing on her mind. By the 5th week, I had everything. The recordings. The draft agreement. Financial records showing transfers already being discussed between Richard's accounts and a shell entity Daniel had quietly set up. Text messages Daniel hadn't bothered to delete because he'd never once imagined I would go looking. My lawyer had reviewed all of it and confirmed what I needed, not just enough to protect myself in a divorce, but enough, potentially, to bring this to the attention of people who investigate exactly this kind of arrangement. Because what Daniel and Richard were building, however they dressed it up in careful legal language, brushed up dangerously close to something with real criminal weight. I chose the night carefully. Daniel had told me Richard was coming over to finalize some paperwork, his exact words, said to my face, in our kitchen, without a flicker of shame. I wonder now if some small part of him wanted me to overhear again, wanted to be caught, wanted an ending forced on him because he didn't have the nerve to end it himself. I'll never know. I've stopped trying to understand what goes on in a man like that, because understanding it would mean granting it a kind of logic it doesn't deserve. They sat in the study with a bottle of wine and a folder of papers between them, and I let them get 30 minutes into their evening before I walked in. Daniel's face did something I'd never seen it do before, a kind of flicker, calculation and confusion at once, before he settled into something falsely casual. Hey, we're just finishing up some business stuff. You don't need to. I know what the business is, I said. The room went very still. Richard set his glass down slowly, the way you do when you're recalculating whether a room is still safe. I know about the $2.5 million, I said. I know about the draft agreement in the Q3 projects folder. I know you told him I'd do whatever you told me to, that I always have. I know about the calls on the second phone in the shaving kit you stopped using 2 years ago. I watched something in Daniel's face fall through the floor. I have all of it. Recordings, documents, financial records, copies in 3 places you'll never find, with a lawyer who already knows exactly what she's looking at. Daniel started and stopped because there was no end to that sentence that didn't make him sound exactly as guilty as he was. Spying on my own husband, I said. Yes, for 6 weeks. While you two decided what I was worth. Richard, to his credit or perhaps just his cowardice, stood up immediately, muttering something about how this was between the two of us, gathering his folder like it was somehow still salvageable. Like a man leaving a building he suddenly realized was on fire. I let him go. He wasn't the one I needed to finish with. Daniel sat there, and for a moment I watched him search for an angle, some version of the old reframing trick, some sentence that would make this sound like a misunderstanding. I watched him give up on finding one. It's not what you think, he said anyway, because men like Daniel say that sentence even when there's no version of what I thought that could possibly be worse than what it was. I already know why. Money. Because Richard offered you a way out of the life you decided asking you why you did it, I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, didn't shake at all. Didn't want any more, and I was simply the asset you had lying around to trade. I let that sit in the room for a second. I only have one question for you, I said. Do you remember whose kidney is keeping you alive right now? He didn't answer. There wasn't an answer. What was he going to say? Yes, and I decided to sell the rest of her anyway. No, I forgot the woman I cut open for, forgot the 6-hour surgery, forgot the year of dialysis, forgot every single thing she gave up so I could stand here in this study deciding what she was worth on paper. I left him sitting there. I didn't throw anything, didn't scream, didn't give him the scene that some smaller, more wounded part of me might have wanted a year earlier. I'd already had my scene, alone, on a bathroom floor at 1 a.m, and I'd used it to build something instead of burning it down blindly. What happened after that moved fast, in the way these things do once the truth is finally out in the open air instead of buried in a shaving kit. I filed for divorce within the week, and my lawyer made sure the documents I'd gathered were preserved properly, admissibly, in case any of it mattered beyond the marriage itself, and it did matter, because a draft agreement to transfer a spouse in exchange for money. However, Daniel and Richard had tried to dress it in the language of business, was not the kind of thing that stayed contained to a divorce court once the right people saw it. I won't walk you through every legal detail. I'll tell you that Daniel lost far more than a wife by the time it was over. The business Richard had dangled in front of him evaporated the moment Richard realized how much exposure he now had. And a man who once measured his worth by watches and cologne found himself explaining all of this to people whose job it was to ask uncomfortable questions. I moved out before any of that finished playing out. My sister had a spare room ready before I even asked for it, because I think some part of her had been ready since that conversation over coffee, years earlier, when she asked what would happen if something went wrong. Something had gone wrong. Just not the something she'd been imagining. People ask me sometimes if I regret the transplant. If I'd go back and refuse, knowing what I know now. I don't think that's the right question. The transplant wasn't the mistake. The mistake was believing that giving someone a piece of yourself guarantees they'll treat the rest of you like it matters. It doesn't. Some people will take everything you're willing to give and still find a way to price the remainder. I kept the recordings. I kept the documents. Not out of vengeance. That part of me settled the day I walked out of that study and didn't look back. I kept them because somewhere down the line, someone might ask me how a woman knows, with absolute certainty, exactly what she's worth to another person. I'll tell them. You find out the day they think you're not listening. Be sure to tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. See you in the next video.